If you want to win at this game of cyber, if you want to be a world-class chief information security officer, keep cyber simple. What is the risk? Likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, cost to fix it. And we recommend fixing 3 out of the 8. And if you keep cyber simple, you will be a world-class chief information security officer. Welcome to Life of a CISO. I'm Dr. Eric Cole, your host, and we'll be taking you on a journey each week on what it takes to be a CISO and what are solutions that you can implement today if you are currently a Chief Information Security Officer or if you want to be one in the future. This is Life of a CISO. Welcome, 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 welcome. You know what time it is. Woohoo! It's time. Yes, it is. It's time for Life of a CISO with yours truly. Dr. E is in the house. And those that are only listening to the audio, you're missing out. You're missing out. I updated my picture. Right? We actually have a new modern picture of Smiling Eric. For those watching video, good reason to go to YouTube. Check out my YouTube channel, Dr. Eric Cole. Got some new pics going on, some new looks. Looking sharp in my nice gray suit. But here today, what I want to talk about is something that I've noticed a trend happening in the clients I'm working with, when I teach at events, when I go in and I talk with clients, is we are making cybersecurity way too complicated. It's really not that hard. Now, yes, I know some of you, there's a group of people that get very, very mad at me. I gave this at a very large event, and the concept was, cyber is so simple, we are making it so complex. And I got so much backlash. Why? Because all these folks are like, but Eric, if you say that, they're not going to want to hire us. They're not going to want to pay us the big bucks. They're not going to want to do all that. I'm like, you're missing the point. The reason why people get paid tons of money is because they have the ability to simplify and explain things in ways that no one else can. Why do you think these amazing, amazing speakers get sometimes $100,000 to give a keynote? Now, you might say, oh, it's because of who they are or what they did or their credentials. No. It's because they have an ability to communicate things in a way in which people resonate and understand that other people can't. The level of mastery is when you're able to take one of the most complex topics on planet Earth and explain it in such a simple, easy way for people to understand. An example of this, it's unfortunately a tragic event, but it's still a great example of the ability to simplify things in a way that somebody can understand. And the example I'll give you is, if you remember, I think it was like 12 or 15 years ago when the space shuttle exploded. Devastating event. Remember, everybody was watching it. I mean, historic, everything looked perfect. And then all of a sudden, I think it was 20 or 30 seconds into takeoff, the whole thing just imploded. And of course, everybody wanted to know what happened. Like, there's so much safety, there's so many controls in place. So Congress had a hearing, and they brought all these brilliant scientists in. And scientist after scientist would go in and be like, well, when you look at the orbital temperature, and nobody understood it. Nobody got it at all. And then there was one scientist that came in, and he said, this is the special foam that keeps everything intact. And during the leaving of the orbit, it's what keeps everything contained in the space shuttle. And if this fails in any way, shape, or form, it would let air in and basically cause an explosion. He goes, this is very special material, and it's meant to be very flexible. And he's flexing it, and it's meant to expand and contract and be very, very, very flexible. He goes, however, there was one thing we failed to consider. when this material is put in cold temperatures, and he puts it in a glass of ice water, and he goes, just having it sit in that ice water for 5 minutes, and he takes it out, and he goes, it loses all its flexibility, and it snaps right there, and it doesn't expand. He goes, this was the first time in 30 years in Cape Canaveral that it was below 30 degrees for 5 hours before the space shuttle launch. We did not take that into account. So this flexible material that's supposed to move and be volatile, because it basically sat in ice water for 5 hours, was no longer flexible. Simple, easy, everybody understood it. And he is one of the most brilliant scientists on the planet. So don't underestimate the power of simplicity. Many, many different factors of why organizations struggle with cybersecurity, but one of the biggest, most fundamental reasons is CISOs are not able to simplify and explain security in a way that executives can understand. As simple as, here's a piece of foam, it's flexible, ice water, it snaps. If we as chief information security officers cannot explain cybersecurity in simple to easy understand business terms, we are going to continue to struggle. And this is the problem. Number one, I work with a lot of CEOs. I sit in a lot of CEO panels. I actually advise them on security. And time after time after time, what every CEO tells me is, Eric, we don't understand what our CISO is saying. They're way too technical. They're way too detailed. There's way too much information for us to process. Can you teach CISOs how to simplify the model, how to simplify the message? And the answer is yes. It's real simple. Let's break it down again. Let's break it down. What is cybersecurity? Cybersecurity is understanding, managing, and mitigating risk of your critical data being disclosed, altered, or denied access. Now, that is the full, complete definition, but in a simplicity sense, it's really, let's focus on risk and critical data. That's really the simplicity, because the confidentiality, integrity, availability, that all takes care of itself. So we're really going to simplify it a little bit. The cybersecurity is all about understanding, managing, and mitigating risk to your critical data. And if we even want to simplify it, leave out all those fancy words, cybersecurity is about risk to your critical data. Nice and simple. So, start with risk. What is risk? Risk is the probability of loss. Risk is the probability of something happening to your organization. Now, here's the cool part. Your executives understand risk. That is the difference between a world-class CEO and an average CEO. World-class CEOs know when and when not to take risk. They know when to push and when to pull. And that's why they're paid the huge bucks, because they understand and manage risk is a part of running a business. You don't think going in and doing what Apple did in the early days was risky? It absolutely was. But Steve Jobs understood and knew what people really wanted even before they wanted it, and was able to take extreme risks with huge payoffs because he was able to balance and see that. And we've seen other companies that have taken huge risks and failed miserably because they didn't understand the marketplace. So the idea of managing and mitigating risk is not new. It's new in cyber, but it's not new in general. So then we get in cyber, what is really risk? Risk is threats times vulnerabilities. It's threats, the potential to harm, things that could cause damage, and vulnerabilities are weaknesses within our system. Now, in order for there to be a high risk, you need both. And this is where a lot of security people go off the rails. They tend to hone in on high threats or high vulnerabilities, but not both. Right? You look at, in a lot of cases, a lot of CISOs screamed wolf with ransomware. Now, don't get me wrong. Ransomware, absolutely a real threat. Absolutely a real threat. And, depending on your industry, potentially high likelihood. However, there has to be certain vulnerable conditions in order for that threat to be able to manifest itself. So there were a lot of CISOs that are like, ransomware, but they didn't necessarily have those weaknesses, so therefore it never manifested. And then what happens? What happens when you make that mistake? You lose credibility. Because now your executives are like, this person a couple years ago was screaming, ransomware, 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 the sky's falling, ransomware, ransomware, and we didn't do anything, and nothing happened. So why should we listen to them now? So you lose credibility when you're falsely focused in on one area. You need to go in and make sure there is a real threat and a real vulnerability. Both of those have to be present. Both of those need to be there because that's only when you have a high risk. If there's a threat with no vulnerability or vulnerability with no threat, risk factor isn't there. And then what are the secret sauce? The secret sauce that many people miss is likelihood and impact. So what we're really after here, my friends, is we want threats that have a high likelihood and vulnerabilities that have a big impact. That's when the risk is high and what we want to focus on. So we want to make sure that we're really understanding the true threats and the true vulnerabilities that are out there. And the big risks right now, once again, organizations are a little different, but the big risks, the two that you really need to focus on, is a server side and a client side. The server side risk is there is still a threat, a high likelihood threat of cyber criminals scanning, looking for public IP addresses. They are scanning and looking for public IP addresses, and they run a series of exploits against them. That's a real threat. We do this all the time. We work with a lot of ISPs whenever they have some unused IP addresses or some IP addresses that haven't been allocated. We'll go in and set up some servers, and within minutes, not weeks, months, or years, but minutes of those servers being put up, they get scanned. So that is a real threat. Absolutely a real threat. Now, the vulnerability is servers that are accessible from the internet that are missing patches. Almost all of the scans we're seeing out there, the real threat that's active, and any new server that goes up is going to get hit. Almost a guarantee. Guarantee, but I can't guarantee, so we say almost a guarantee. But wink, wink, it's a guarantee without the guarantee. But they know there's so many people, even today, even in this current day and age, there's so many entities that put unpatched systems. That's what they're looking for. Not doing 0 days. Yeah, there's some, but those are few and far between. That's not high likelihood. The high likelihood is looking for servers accessible from the internet that are missing patches. Boom. Now, is a server that's just missing a patch necessarily a big impact? Not necessarily. It becomes a big impact when it contains critical data. So now, as security professionals, the first starting point we're going to look at is adding in that critical data piece. Right? What is your critical data and where is it located? Get back to that a little later in this podcast. But now we have servers accessible from the internet, missing patches that contain critical data. Those by far are a huge risk and an accident waiting to happen. So if you want to go in as a CISO and start making positive difference, you want to simplify cybersecurity. You want to simplify it down into the core, base, easy to understand components. First thing you should absolutely be aware of is every server that's accessible from the internet. Publicly facing servers, servers that are assigned a public IP address, are high risk because they can be targeted directly. They can directly be accessed. So you need to have a list of those servers. Then you should have a subcategory of which of those servers are not patched and which of those servers contain critical data. What is your goal? Your goal is to have the second two columns empty. What I'm saying is every server that's accessible from the internet must be fully patched and cannot contain critical data. If companies followed that simple rule, any server accessible from the internet is fully patched and never contains critical data. And yes, you can absolutely run a business that way. Many of our clients do. No reason why you can't. But Eric, how do we do e-commerce? Piece of cake. Multi-tiered environment. You have a front-end web server that's fully patched, doesn't contain any critical data, and then goes through a variety of security devices to access and obtain the critical data on a back-end system. But the critical data is not accessible from the internet, and the critical data is not residing on the web server. Simple, simple, easy peasy. Cyber is simple. Maybe that should be the title of this episode. Right? So the point is, we now have a simple rule that's based on the fundamental principles of cyber, that's based on high risk, threats, high likelihood, vulnerability impact to our environment that's actively being exploited by cyber criminals. So rule one, any system accessible from the internet, any system directly accessible from the internet, any system with a public IP address must be fully patched and contain critical data. But Eric, you know as well as I that there's some servers that can't be patched. Great. They're not internet worthy. They need to be on back ends. That's a big thing with critical infrastructure. A lot of the critical infrastructure cannot be fully patched. These systems, when you look at critical digital assets in operating environments like OT environments, oil, gas, nuclear, these systems need to be simple. They need to be verified. They need to be validated, which means they can't be updated and patched because they impact the availability and stability. And that's the reason why most of these systems are designed and built to be on an air gap. The only way to truly exploit them, if they are deployed correctly, is by a physical attack. Somebody physically breaching the premise. They are not, cannot, and was never ever designed to be accessible from the internet. That's when you see these major breaches, because they break the rules. These are systems that are vulnerable. These are systems that are missing patches. These are systems that have known exploits. And companies, for some crazy reason, because they make cyber so complex, they don't understand the simplicity rules, they connect them to the internet and game over. So we have to keep it simple. Keep it simple. All the clients we work with, the developers, the business units, everyone knows it's real simple. You want to put servers out on the internet? Great. Fully patched, don't contain critical data. You do that, acceptable risk. You don't do that, unacceptable risk, and you got to go to the executive board and explain why you are putting the company in an extreme risk position to allow the organization to get compromised. Cyber is simple. Any system accessible from the internet must be fully patched and not contain critical data. Boom. I think we hit that one pretty hard. Next, client side. Probably doesn't surprise you, probably not a shocker, but the number one way of compromising a client, which ultimately lets you into the organization, is still today phishing attacks. Phishing attacks, sending an email that looks, acts, and seems legitimate. These attackers are good. They are really good. They are good to the point, some people get mad at me, where we have moved past awareness as our only defensive mechanism. Now, don't get me wrong. I think awareness is important. I think it's key that people are aware. However, it cannot be your only line of defense because these look legitimate. As far as the user is concerned, this came from their bank. This came from their boss. This came from the shipping company. This came from their e-commerce vendor. There is absolutely no visible way for them to be able to differentiate between them. So therefore, if your only thing is be aware and don't click, I remember this just happened a couple of weeks ago. I'm talking to a company like, Eric, we know. If there's spelling errors, if there's domain name, I'm like, no, all of that is valid today. And here's the disservice. If you are still training your employees and telling them, listen, when an email comes in, make sure the domain name is correct. Make sure there's no spelling errors. Make sure the links don't have anything embedded in it. And if those are all okay, you can click on it. You're doing the biggest disservice on the planet because you're training them to be bad actors. Because that's how most phishing attacks are today. Most phishing attacks are valid valid domain names, no spelling errors, valid links. So if you're training them, only look for unusual things, and if there's nothing unusual, it's okay. Right? You are training them to click on malicious links. We cannot do that. Now, yes, I remember, 20, 25 years ago? I remember I was CISO at a company in the 90s, and the I Love You virus came out. Now, if you're not familiar with the I Love You virus, it's quite simple. When you get infected, it sends an I love you message to everyone in your address book. It basically has a title, I love you, and it says, here's a message of love just for you. And there's a link. Now, I remember when that virus came around, I'm sitting there going, It was obvious that it was phishing. Let me help you out. If you work in an organization where it's normal for you to send I love you messages to your coworkers, you need some psychological help. That is not normal, my friends. It is not normal for me to come in the morning and go, you know something? I don't think I've told my employees I love them today. Let me send them an I love you. It's not normal. But people clicked on it anyway. So they're getting a message. They know it's not normal. They know it's not legit. They know there's something wrong, and they click on it anyway. And I remember talking to a friend going, what happens when the email looks legit? What happens when it seems legit, smells legit, looks legit? And that's where we are today. Today, we're not getting I love you messages. Today, we're getting valid messages looking like they came from your e-commerce vendor, your shipping vendor, or your bank, and they look perfectly legit. So the reality is today, and we're getting there. We're making progress. More and more of our clients are doing it. But the reality today is this. Email was never meant to have embedded links or attachments. There are other ways of doing that. If you need to transfer files, there's secure file transfer protocols. If you need to send people links, there's ways to do that. But it was never meant to be clickable in email. That was not the design. That was not the intent. So we need to get to the point where you need to brief your executives on the risk, the threats, and the vulnerabilities, and make a simple decision. Is this risk worth it? Is it worth us allowing embedded links which have very little business value? Now, it's funny because people always fight with me. Oh, Eric, we can't run a business. You'll paralyze the business. You can't do this. When the reality is, there's very little legitimate use. There's not a lot of valid use for embedded links and emails. But people never like things taken away from them. So they'll fight tooth and nail when in reality, there's little benefit to the organization and huge risk. So the reality is that most organizations we should just no longer allow embedded links. Real simple. I'll give you an example of this. We had a client of ours, every few months they get infected, cost them millions upon millions of dollars. Every single one of the attacks were embedded links in emails, and the user was clicking on it. Awareness wasn't working, none of those things were working. So I remember I was called in to the executive board meeting, and I said, it's real simple, my friends, it's real simple. I looked at your organization, I understand the organization. All we need to do is no longer allow embedded links in email from external IPs. It's super simple. Minimal impact to the business. I studied the business. I looked at the communication. Minimal impact, and it will take away your number one risk and stop the current threats to your organization. Well, you would have thought I was kidnapping their kids. These vice presidents and you can't do this. You can't take away, and I'm like, you're fighting for stupid. Why are you fighting me? I want to help you. I want to secure you. I want you to make lots of money. Why are you fighting me? And people fight when you take anything away. So they went crazy. You can't do that. So the exec said, okay, table it. They then ended the meeting, and the CEO said, Eric, please stay. He goes, Eric, I am no longer making this a democracy. He goes, this has gotten out of hand. I've seen the pattern. It will continue. How confident are you that if you no longer allow embedded links from externally, two things. One, that it won't paralyze the company like all these people said. And two, that it will have a positive net impact. I said, I'm confident in both. He said, don't tell anyone, just do it. Okay? So we did. You know what happened? Two things. Nobody noticed, nobody complained, and that threat vector went away. So we show up 3 months later at the next board meeting, and we give the presentation and go, interesting. As you might know, every quarter for the last 5, we've had 2 or 3 incidents, multi-millions of dollars. This, we've had none. We've had no incidents, no threats. And it's funny because right away, all the VPs said, oh, see, we told you, Eric, you didn't need to do your stuff. And the CEO said, stop. He said, tell him, Eric. I said, are you sure? He said, yeah. So I said, after the meeting, I met with the CEO. He trusted me. And for the last 3 months, we've blocked all embedded links. None of you noticed. None of you complained. No impact to the business. 0 threats. And it was like, I'm not sure if they were going to attack me or thank me, right? It was sort of this awkwardness going, okay, he's right, but we don't like that he's right. The reality is, many people have false narratives. Many people have false stories, and many people have false beliefs when it comes to security. So, give you one of my number 1 rules. Let data drive decisions, not emotions. When it comes to security, let the data drive it. And that's why that CEO trusted me, because I had data. I had data. I wasn't emotional like the VPs. I had hardcore data, and he trusted it. So if we want to keep cyber simple, it's easy. Take everything I just said, and let's summarize it as we wrap up. When you present to your board, if we're keeping cyber simple, no longer 30 slide decks, we're no longer putting all this complexity and details. All we're doing is coming in with a real simple spreadsheet that has 4 columns and has about 8 items on it. Currently, right now to our organization, these are the 8 biggest risks, and you have 4 things. This is the risk in English, likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, and cost to fix it. And then you're going in and saying, right now, these are 8 top risks. You can clearly see what they are. You can see the likelihood of occurring, cost if it occurs, and cost to fix it. I know we don't have unlimited budget. I don't think we should do all 8. I think we should only do the top 3. Now, you're keeping cyber simple. You're presenting it in English so they can understand it. And you're showing them you're balancing risk. Not only mistake 1 is most CISOs don't speak English. Mistake 2 is they don't show that they understand risk. Most CISOs say if there's 8 risks, fix them all. Spend every last penny on security. That's not practical. Real CISOs present 8 and only want to fix 3. So if you want to win at this game of cyber, if you want to be a world-class Chief Information Security Officer, keep cyber simple. What is the risk? Likelihood of occurrence, cost if it occurs, cost to fix it. And we recommend fixing 3 out of the 8. And if you keep cyber simple, you will be a world-class Chief Information Security Officer.